What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Fools Get Clean Too. Nicole G is going to do a school assignment and she's going to interview me. So let's check it out.
Hi, this is Gabriel Rodriguez, and today I'll be interviewing him about his experience growing up as a Mexican American and his past struggles, recovery, and where his life is today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Tell me a little bit about your life growing up as a Chicano and how your environment, experiences, and choices have shaped the person you are today.
So, growing up in a predominantly Mexican family, my mom's from Mexico. My dad was born in Watts, but his family's from Mexico also. Um, it was awesome. There was a lot of love in the house in the beginning. There was always food, tortillas, beans, and like our culture was pretty awesome. You know what I mean? And it's about family and it's about togetherness and it's about celebration. Um, but as time went on, my immediate family, my mother and my father, their relationship became to get toxic, and I didn't know that my mom had mental health issues growing up, so that played a big part in it. And my dad would drink a lot. You know what I mean? And my dad was Chicano also. He was born in Watts in the United States. My mom was from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, right? So she had a little different upbringing. They met when they were about 17, 18 years old. And they pretty much rushed it, right? They had my sister. My dad went to the Marines. So my dad's outlook is more like Americanized than my mom's, And so, but I remember growing up, my dad used to have a Cutlass Supreme and they used to call him Wino, right? I remember being in his Cutlass Supreme going to football practice or to Disneyland and he would have a pony keg behind his seat, right? And I would sit behind his seat because I always wanted to pump it, right? So he would have the hose going to his mouth. So he'd be like, pump it, mijo. So I'd pump it. He would take a drink and then I'll have to pump it for him, like as we drove. Those are fond memories of my dad, right? Because I remember when my dad always had a drink in his hand. You know what I mean? So I think that's where the addiction became okay at a sense, right? Because whether my dad was stressed or happy, he was always drinking, And I remember when they started having issues, and my dad moved us out to Texas for a little while. My mom and him split up, and I kept on getting in trouble out there because I wanted to come stay with my dad. So it worked. I got in trouble, come stay with my dad, and my dad was staying with his mom and his dad, my grandparents, right? So I remember at a young age coming home from school one day, and all my dad's stuff was gone, right? And so I asked my grandma, "Where's my dad at?" And my grandma was like, "Well, your dad's gone." And I was like, "What do you mean?" So my dad called me and told me like, "Hey, I moved in with this lady. I remember. I don't want to say her name though." And I was like, "What about me?" He was like, "Well, if you need anything, let me know." You know what I mean? So I kind of felt abandoned, right? My dad sold the house in Texas. My mom moved back down here, but she was staying with her mom in Santana, and she had all my sisters with her, right? So me and my siblings were separated. I have three sisters, two older, one younger, and I just remember that feeling of abandonment. You know what I mean? And I would go to the neighborhood and hang out with my friends because like they were my they were my support. You know what I mean? And my friends became like my family. And my friends in the neighborhood, that was who I went to for belonging and for attention. You know what I mean? Whether it was negative or positive. And I started running the streets at a young age. I want to say started doing drugs. I started drinking with, a matter of fact, with my dad. Right? My dad used to let me drink when I was with him, and I thought it was cool. I hated the taste of beer, but I liked the effects. Right? I want to say I was like 10, 11. And then 12, 13, I started smoking weed. And 13, 14, I started doing meth. And I remember the first time I tried it, right? Like I wasn't hungry and I didn't need to sleep, right? And so I remember staying out for weeks at a time when I was staying with my grandparents. And my grandparents said, like, you have to come home or at least call us, right? And I was just hurting and I didn't know how to deal with that stuff. So I didn't follow any rules, so they ended up kicking me out at a young age, right? So being 13 years old and homeless, you know what I mean? That was kind of rough. So I went to my neighborhood, and my neighborhood accepted me, right? But I was ashamed of not having a place to stay, right? So I had a little GT Mach 1 bike, right? And I used to ride it around the neighborhood at night. and I would patrol the neighborhood with a gun, and meth used to help me with that, right? Because I didn't have to sleep and I didn't have to eat, and I thought I was doing work for the neighborhood because I was making sure that no enemies would come through. And I remember in the morning one time I was riding by my friend's house, and one of my friend's mom was like, "Tienes hambre? Are you hungry?" And I was like, "No, I'm good." She said, "No, vente pa acá." So she invited me in the house. She made me breakfast, and she told my friend to let me borrow some clothes so I could take a shower. And I stayed with them for a few months, and then I started getting incarcerated. And in the neighborhood that I grew up in and that I was a part of, right? There's a lot of, especially in the '90s, there was a lot of chaos and dysfunction and police activity and gang stuff. You know what I mean? So like you couldn't just walk down the street. You know what I mean? Because enemies would come or the cops would come, right? And you was a catch 22 because if you didn't have a weapon on you, your enemies would get you. You know what I mean? And my sole purpose was not getting got by an enemy. And I remember like I would not fear, but I was more worried about the the enemies and the cops, right? So I would rather get caught slip. I would rather have not got caught slipping by my enemy than get caught by the cops. You know what I mean? Because you can run and throw or whatever. You know what I mean? Get away from the cops, right? But it's kind of hard to outrun a bullet. You know what I mean? So that's what kind of my childhood was like. You know what I mean? I remember at 14 years old going to continuation school. I grew up on Santa Ana on Harbor and Hazard, right? And so my continuation school was on Euclid and Hazard. So I would have to ride my bike from Harbor, passing New Hope, on Hazard. And as soon as I crossed the light on New Hope, my enemies would be waiting for me and they would start shooting at me, right? So I remember I had to carry a 32 with me, and I would hide behind the car, shoot back. Then I'll take back off to school, and then I had a little McDonald's fry box that I used to save right there. Put my gun in there, put it in a little green transformer on the back of the parking lot, and then get because we had to get wanted. We went to school, it was continuation school, like for probation and stuff. And I remember going to school like nothing, and like it was normal to me. You know what I mean? It was like a game, but it was like a sick game. You know what I mean? Like where lives were in jeopardy. And I remember going to school, doing my schoolwork, and then coming back out and thinking like, "Fuck, I got to do it all over again." Right? So I used to bring two clips. Right? I would empty one on the way up and then have one on the way back. Sometimes they would be there, sometimes they wouldn't. Right? But just like knowing, and went on for like 3 months. You know what I mean? So sometimes it would be there, and sometimes it wouldn't. You know what I mean? But just the anticipation of like what 14-year-old has to go through that. You know what I mean? So that kind of like molded my thinking, and that was the environment I was in. And I remember after that, I went to another continuation school called Lake, and it was more of a structured school, right? We went 4 hours a day, and I literally would just go to get drugs and talk to the girls. You know what I mean? And I didn't do anything for school. I remember I think it was my second year. The principal called me in the office, right? And he was like, "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean I'm in school?" It was like, "You literally been here for 2 years, but you have like 5 credits. Like you haven't been doing any work." And I would just go get high in the bathroom or talk with the girls or like ditch or whatever, right? And so like my education wasn't a priority pretty much, right? My priority was being from the neighborhood, putting in work, and kicking in with girls or doing drugs. You know what I mean? That was my whole world revolved around, right? And as I got older, also around that time, I got busted for I want to say a hot one, right? Like something that could got me life in prison, right? And so I remember going to school, and the principal called me in the office, right, and says, "Hey, Gabriel, I just want to like this conversation never happened." I'm like, "What's up?" He was like, "It's just hypothetically the cops came looking for you." And I was like, "All right." He said, "Hypothetically, you weren't here." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "Then I couldn't tell me you were at." And I was like, "All right." He goes, "You get my drift?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I took off, right? So he gave me a heads up that the cops went to the school looking for me. And I was like, "All right." And then so I went on the run, got busted. They raided my dad's house, and and I remember like being on the living room on the floor sleeping, right, and just hearing the door kicked in. Garden Grove SWAT team, Tatana PD, and they had my dad, my stepmom, my stepsister, my stepbrother on the couch in handcuffs. You know what I mean? So let me backtrack a little bit. So I had got busted before that, right, for like a crime that I didn't commit. So they let me out, right? So my dad was concerned about the choices I was making. So he was like, "Hey, why don't you come stay with me for a little while? You know what I mean? To see how uh how you do staying with me instead of your homeboys, right?" So I would like literally just sleep there or shower there and just take off. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to be around my stepmom or their kids. You know what I mean? And I remember I was tweaking for a few days and I wanted to get some like 20 bucks from my dad and get some sleep and get some food. So I came back and I guess the cops were looking for me. So I guess they see me come in. So they waited till like 5 in the morning to kick the door down. So I get busted and it was a pretty intense crime, right? So I remember going to juvenile hall and there's a thing where it's called 707, right? It's called a fitness hearing. That's to see if your crime is eligible to be tried as an adult. And I remember I went to that and they said, yeah. And I was like, what is that? Like, I didn't know what any of it meant, right? So a public defender told me, like, that means that you're going to be tried as an adult. You know what I mean? Like, so you're not going to go to juvenile hall court anymore. You're going to be tried as an adult going to adult court. You know what I mean? So that means, like, you can't go to youth authority. Like, you're going to do prison time if you get found guilty. I was like, man, and honestly, it was mixed emotions, right? It was like, that's right, I'm a badass. You know what I mean? And like, oh fuck, like this is real. And I remember the first time going to court and they set all the charges, right? Assault the firearm, shooting him into any spot, attempted murder. And I asked, like, it was a lot of charges, right? So I asked my public defender, like, what does that mean? They were like you're in some trouble. And I was like, well, what's the most time I can get? They were like, if you get found guilty for most of these, 44 to life. And I remember my heart just dropped, right? And I had a lump in my throat. And I remember going back to my cell and doing a whole year single cell most of the time, except for the first two cells. I think you have to be on cart crew to get that. And I remember just laying down at night, like thinking, like, man, 44 years. Not even like tripping on the life stuff, right? Because I didn't know how it worked, right? Because back then they would sentence people like 7 to life, 5 to life, 15 years of life. You know what I mean? But back then, like the life meant life. People like that didn't know would sign because they just see like the front number, right? Okay, I could do 5 years and like you're eligible for parole right then, right? But the chances are of you getting out were very slim, right? So everyone who got convicted in the early '90s, late '90s, like they're barely getting out now because of the new law they passed, right? But I remember hearing 44 to life, that hit me. You know what I mean? And like, and I also in the environment I grew up in, like it was chaotic like that. You know what I mean? I remember like people were getting shot on the daily, especially in summertime. Like go down Bristol, go to a party, like who got shot? Oh yeah, who's dead? You know, who got caught slipping? You know what I mean? Or people with black in your neighborhood. That means like spray paint graffiti. You would cross them out. It was like a cat and mouse game, right? You would look forward to catching someone walking down the street by themselves, or in a car by themselves, or and Jack in a Box in the drive-through by themselves. You know what I mean? And just creep, and it was like a war on the streets of Santa Ana. You know what I mean? This is like 92, 93, 94, 95, 96. Like it was really active, and I remember 94 when that law got passed where being tried as an adult at 14 and a half years old came through, right? So that's around when I got busted. I got busted in 96, I think it was. And so my dad got me a lawyer, my crimey got a lawyer, and my crimey had an alibi, right? And so he was at work. So like he had action, right? So they tried to get him to flip on me, but he wouldn't, right? But they came out with a plea bargain that was pretty good. It was 5 years, 2 strikes, right? So we did 2 years in the county. The year in juvenile hall that we didn't count. And then if we violate our gang term probation, then we get 3, 6, or 9 years at the discretion of the judge, right? So I just remember wanting to sign it. My crime was like, no, I'm not gonna sign that shit. I'm like, dude, like you got an alibi, but I don't. You know what I mean? Like I'll get stressed out. You know what I mean? Because you want to take it to the box. That means fight it all the way to the end of the trial. So I was like, man. So we ended up taking it. He did me that favor, and he got out and stayed out. You know what I mean? And I remember like accumulatively over the years, right? My addiction got progressive, right? I went from using alcohol and weed, from weed to speed, crystal meth, and then I tried heroin, right? So, like, I was always the youngest one in the neighborhood. right? Like I was a baby of the crew, right? So they called me little man from my neighborhood, right? And I wore it with the badge of honor, right? Because I was like 13, 14 years old, hanging around 18, 19, 21 year olds. You know what I mean? And that's where the sense of the belonging and the family came together. You know what I mean? And putting in work and being recognized by the elders in my neighborhood. You know what I mean? Or elders from other neighborhoods felt good, right? And we used to hang around other neighborhoods, and like my neighborhood, they primarily did speed or did coke or smoked rock, right? Like old stimulants, right? Another neighborhood we hung out with, they were like opiate users, right? Like heroines, and I remember growing up back then, like we used to think like tecatos, like heroin users, like those were the bottom of the barrel, right? Like you never want to be like that. He's a fucking hype. Excuse my language. He's a hype. You know what I mean? And and I remember like there was other neighborhoods that we used to talk crap on because they would put needles in their arms or smoked heroin or did whatever, right? But I remember I was hanging out with this neighborhood that we got along with, and they were smoking heroin, right? And I was an upper kind of guy, right? So I would always like to be up, and they're like, "Hey, want to take a hit?" And just to fit in, I was like, "Yeah, let me take a couple of hits." So I took a couple of hits, tasted nasty, felt nauseous, right? But I would hang around with them often, right? Because a lot of them been to prison, they had the tattoos, they had the talk, they had the girls, you know what I mean? So I like kind of wanted to emulate that, you know. And I remember I I smoked it more, and I started liking it. You know what I mean? The effects, the euphoria of it, right? And I remember I want to say 16 years old, we went to another neighborhood, another city, and by then I was already smoking like 2 weeks in a row, right? So uh, I remember the first time I felt sick, I was like, "What the hell? I feel like I have the flu," right? And we went. One of my friends was going to drop off some speed to another neighborhood, so we went over there. She sold heroin, and they were like, "We'll pick up over there. We'll get loaded," right? So my homeboy was going to buy a couple grams, and there was like five of us in the car. So I remember went over there, and she was like, "Man, I only have a gram," and there were like five of us. And all those dudes, except for one, they slammed. They shot up with the needle, right? And I was like in my mind, I'm thinking like, I'll do heroin, but I'm never gonna shoot up, right? But she had like a brand new pack of needles, and then I was like, nah, I don't do that. And she gave me like what looked like two match heads of heroin. Like this is only two hits, it's not gonna do nothing to me. Like I was smoking like half a gram at that time, right? Which is like 10 times that amount, right? So she was like, "Well, I could hit you," and I was like, "Man!" So these guys were doing like whatever issue they had, they were loaded, right? And I was like, "I want to feel like that." So I said, "All right." So I turned around, put my arm out, and she hit me, and I just remember that rush, that feeling, right? And like this is the best way to explain it, right? Like the rush from shooting heroin is the closest you'll have the feeling to getting a warm hug from God, right? Because of euphoria and like the warmth and the the feeling of just ecstasy going through your body, through your veins, you know what I mean? And no pain, no worry, you know what I mean? So I good thing I got incarcerated like shortly after that, right? So um any chance I got to use drugs when I was incarcerated, whether it be in juvenile hall or the county jail, I would do it, right? So there's people that were hitting dope from their families or their wives or whatever, or through the mail, and like I would be in those circles, right? I would get high. So when I ended up getting out of the county, um, I uh, I went to the neighborhood, and all those guys that were doing speed back then are doing heroin now. You know what I mean? And like they would try to like scare me by saying, if we catch you doing it, we're gonna mess you up. You know what I mean? I was like, man, shut up. You know what I mean? You're just doing speed and smoking rock. What's the difference? Drugs are drugs, right? So I remember going to the neighborhood and everyone was doing it, so I started doing it again, right? So I failed to go test for my PO, and my PO put out a power now for me, Proly at large, right? So I remember I was running around, and then my PO would go to my dad's house and give him a hard time. My dad was like, "Hey, mijo, just turn yourself in." And I was like, "Man," so I got some heroin, some speed, some weed, a couple syringes, a couple lighters, and I hooped it, right? Meaning I put it in my rectal cavity, right? Because I wanted to take it inside there to make some money and help my kick go a little earlier, I mean, a little easier. So I remember going to the police station. My dad drove me in my car, and I said, "I'm turning myself in." They're like, "You don't have a warrant?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." They're like, "No, you don't." said, my PO, he told me he had a power warrant out for me. I'd been absconding for like 5 months or like 4 months. So I went and he said, you don't have a warrant, but if you want to come in, hit me and I'll take you in. And I was like, no, I'm good. So I dropped my dad at his house, right? And then went to the neighborhood again. Because at this time, I can't stay with my dad just because of all the chaos I caused, right? So I'm literally staying in my car, homeboys' pads or garages or momos or whatever. And I remember we were going to a party, me and some of the homies, and I get lit up, right? The cops get behind me, and I said, "Don't trip, I'm good." You know what I mean? And so they pull me over, and they say I have $100,000 bench warrant for an assault to fire because I ended up pleading guilty to assault to firearm, right? And I said, I already did time for that. They said, well, you see, I have an active warrant here. So they took me in, and I remember going to court the first time, like 11 days after that. And then I'm like, what's up? Like, no one's talking to me. No one said anything. I said, yeah, well, like, you already got your time. I'm like, how much time on my face? And he had the paperwork that was shown at juvenile hall that I signed. And it said 3, 6, or 9 years up to judge's discretion. And I was like, dude, I just have a drug problem. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not out there gang banging or killing anybody or hurting anyone. He was like, well, I'll let him know. So, like, the judge had mercy on me and gave me 3 years. You know what I mean? But that was my introduction to the California state prison system. You know what I mean? And I was nervous as hell. You know what I mean? I was nervous and excited at the same time. So I remember when I first get there, I go to level three. I go to reception, then I go to level three at SATF Corcoran. It was a newer Corcoran, and where I slammed down because the Caucasians and the whites and the Southsiders, which group I fall under, were warring, right? And we're like slammed down for like 6 months. So I had a mid annual. So they dropped my points to level two. So I'm a level two B yard, just running amok. And like I said, I did drugs anytime I had a chance, right? So there was so much drugs right there, and I got so strung out over there, and that was like because it's like being a part of a gang. There's like a connection, right? Like a fellowship, like a camaraderie, right? And when you're in prison, it's that by 10 times, right? Because there's so many other factions, right? There's so many other groups, right? Because you have Orange County, San Diego, LA, Central California, different parts of LA, the Valley, South Central. You know, so like there was a saying, right? Like someone would be like boasting about the neighborhood. Someone would be like, "I'm a Sureño, my gang's bigger." You know what I mean? Meaning that like it's okay to be from your neighborhood, but like my belief is this core system right here, right? And so feeling a part of like the homies in there, it felt good, right? And like I was a little knucklehead, so I would put in work. And remember, I got busted for a knife for whatever reason, and I ended up going to the hole for the first time. And like that stuff you see in movies, right? Like the gallo, right? That's like the roll call, right? Where they acknowledge your name and say good morning, good night, you know what I mean? Or fishing, right? Fishing is like how we communicate in there. So it's like you get the boxer string, you break it down, you twist it up, you turn it into a little rope, you get a weight to be able to shoot it down the chair, and then you slip knot whatever you need to. You guys tie on, meaning like you guys intertwine the lines so you guys can pull back and forth. You know what I mean? And all that it intrigued me. You know what I mean? Because it's stuff you've seen in prison and stuff you heard about the people getting in and out of prison. You know what I mean? These are guys I looked up to. You know what I mean? That were known in the neighborhoods and I wanted to be like known for that for my neighborhood, right? To put in work, you know, and to be a sureño. You know what I mean? So I remember getting out from that, and I paroled probably like 4 months after that, and I paroled, and like I felt like I was like down for my neighborhood. You know what I mean? Because I was in Corcoran, and I went to the hole. You know what I mean? And I got out, no direction, and so my mind wasn't to go out there and to use drugs or hurting anybody, right? My mind was like society locked me up, so like I deserve to have a good time, right? So I got out, kicked it with the homies, got drunk, got loaded, and I would always parole homeless, right? So like any kind of like opportunity to get into a program to have a roof to live over, a roof to live in, for the initial time of me getting out till I figured out a plan, that's what I would do, right? So I requested a program from my PO. They put me in a program. Or remember that time I went to a sober living and Action Alliance. People were slamming right there. It was chaotic, right? So I ended up hitting the streets like a month out, absconding for 3 months. And my motive was like, get out, do good for a month, and then start using again and then running for 3 months, right? So like my normal time for staying out was about 4 months. So I remember getting out, staying out 4 months, got busted for another possession, got 32 months doubled up with the prison prior, and go back to prison. And that was a revolving door for, I want to say, I got 3 years, 3 times, and 8 years my last time. The last time I got incarcerated um, was for possession also. And I got 3 years with the prison prior. And I went to a level two prison, and like I said, I use, right? So I'm picking up from people, calling people out if they want to get paid. And like I would pick up drugs and not have any means to pay for it. I mean, people do like green dot numbers every once in a while, or I'll pay them back with store or package stuff, you know what I mean? But the amount of drugs I was picking up, like I probably should have been whacked in there for that, you know what I mean? Or at least removed from a yard, which I never have, that never happened to me, right? And I just remember in those lower levels, it's really active as far as like fist, right? So like there's a lot of one-on-one mutual combats or like riots on the yard, right? And I went to Avenal, which is level two. The whole yard's level two. The whole prison's level two. Different factions, and I remember they have 2 yards with norteños and homies. Then they had a yard with bulldogs and homies, and then with just paisas, homies, and whites. And so I remember going to a yard with the norteños and the homies, and there was a riot, right? And I remember going off in the middle of the field, and there was a guy that was trying to uh, hit a homie that was on the ground, and I kicked him in his face, like square in his fucking nose. Excuse me, square in his nose. You know what I mean? And we made eye contact before I kicked him. Like he would have went up, right? And he like went out, right? And the cops got me, whatever. They pepper sprayed me. They got me, put us in the chow hall, right? We're like in the hog ties for like 8 hours, right? Go to the hall, and then they kicked me back out to another yard, right? And it was other Norteños that were there, and he was in the building I was in, right? And I was like, man, like we locked eyes, and I was like, we don't need a strap, you know what I mean? Because we never addressed that, you know. So I got an manufactured weapon, right? It was pretty big bone crusher, and I used to carry it on me all the time, right? And I remember going to Chow and then coming back, and then they pulled me over, and I got busted for that weapon, right? Mm-hmm. So I caught a shoe term. I ended up going to the hall, and the DA picked it up. Kings County picked it up. So I went to court. They offered me 5 years. In my mind, I'm because after those two strikes from juvenile hall, remember? So in my mind, I'm thinking anything under 10 years, I'm taking, right? So they offered me 5 years, and I said, let me get it, right? So I signed for it. Then I ended up going to Tehachapi Shoe, and I had been to the shoe before, right? During one of my stints for multiple riots at Avenal again. And I went to like 3 different yards like within 4 months, right? Because what they do is they'll send you to the hall, they'll suspend your shoe and kick you back out to the yard, right? So after 3 of them, they're like, you're program failure. So they gave me it was a year shoe, and I made it to Corcoran with like 6 months left. So I had a taste of the shoe, right? And the experience then was kind of crazy because my celly was a little off, right? So I was thinking that it was going to be the same way, right? The same setup. So I go and it's a different setup, right? The tiers set up different, the blocks are set up different, right? And over there, they spoke a lot of Nawa, right? That's like Aztec dialect for the Mexica, uh, as Mexica Indians, right? So like they have a saying in the morning, right? Like to be able to present themselves in the tiers, right? That's like Tla, Shine, Pupuikan, Ipan, O Lipi. I mean, excuse me on the tier. And then like they'll be like Ashley Oquichli, right? So that means little man, right? And I'll be like Kema, that means yes. And then they'll be like Wali Wali, right? Like good afternoon or good evening, you know, and that really intrigued me too, right? Because it was going back into my culture, my heritage, right? Being a Chicano, right? There's more to it, right? Because like we're born in the United States, right? But our heritage is Mexican, right? The Mexican heritage is the Mexica uh, Indians, right? So like we're native, you know what I mean, to this land. And just learning about the culture, the language, the dialect, the ideology behind it. You know what I mean? Like it's really popular in prison, right? Because it makes you feel more connected to who you are as a person, and like what we're striving for in there, and like we used to do kites, like we used to call them wheelas, like little notes, right? And then they would use that dialect on there, right? But the cops, like, people debrief and lock it up all the time, so they give up the information, right? But like we do everything in our can to communicate without like the authority figuring out what we're doing, right? So like it was really intriguing to be there, and I was on group yard right there, right? So I seen a couple guys get removed from the yard right there, and being out there doing routine with the guys, you know what I mean? Because in the shoe program, it's mandatory routine. Even in the higher levels, mandatory routine, right? That means like you got to bust down and do the exercise that whoever's calling it, you know what I mean? And and just like participating with whatever the the homies are doing, And I remember being out there one time working out, and the homie who had it right there said, "Hey man, like stay away from so and so." I was like, "All right," you know what I mean? And they moved on him. They sliced him up, and they shot the block gun, and they got down. You know what I mean? But and it's crazy, right? Because like in prison, like I'm really to myself. You know what I mean? I think it was more of a defense mechanism. Like I was really quiet, and I didn't, but I was always listening. My ears are always open. I was really observant, right? But I wasn't really want to talk much. You know what I mean? So like doing this interview, or like because of my podcast, you know what I mean? Like getting up here and talking in front of camera, like it's a big change for me. You know what I mean? And even in the industry that I work in, right? Like keep communicate with my staff. You know what I mean? It was hard. I remember getting out of prison and like whispering, right? Because of the living situation in prison, right? And to be able to function at a high, like a normal level as a human being out here, that was hard, right? So like people trusted me that were in power positions that were in there, right? Because they know I wouldn't say anything. They know I didn't hang around with certain people. I would literally go to day room, jump on the phone, watch TV or play cards, right? Like I didn't have a set crew of people. There's guys that I communicated with and said what's up to, shook their hands, right? But I wasn't a stationary person, right? Like people usually go in groups or have their little crews they kick it with, right? And in prison, you get whacked mostly for drug debts, politicking, or you have bad paperwork, right? Bad paperwork meaning like you told or R suffix, that means sexual offenses, you know what I mean? Or you did something messed up and you got something you got coming, right? So I didn't really hang out with anyone. Like I knew people who had different crews, right? Meaning like they work for different people in power, right? But that wasn't me. Like I wasn't trying to be anybody. I wasn't trying to like move up the ladder, so to speak, right? I was just trying to like represent for my neighborhood and be down when my name was called, right? So getting out of Tehachapi Shoe, and I went to Ironwood, right? And then from Ironwood, I was there for about, I want to say like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. Ironwood's a level 3, right? And like I said, I was really cool with the people who were people who had power right there, right? So like I was running them up with the dope again and getting high, and like people wanted to get paid, so they'll go complain, right? But I never got hot money, right? Hot money meaning like they're kicking into somebody of power, right? These were like freelancers. I would get dope and try to get rich off the yard. They wouldn't want to kick in, you know what I mean? Or they try to do it on the hush, right? So like people who have the yard would tell me like, "Hey, go ahead. If you want to call them out, go ahead." So I'd be like, "What's up? You want to get paid? Go to my cell." You know what I mean? And honestly, it was a win-win for me, right? Because if we got caught, then I wouldn't be on the yard, right? So no one can collect. You know what I mean? Or they'll punk out and no one's gonna respect them and everyone's gonna burn them. You know what I mean? So and no one ever wanted to catch a fade over that. You know what I mean? So and in prison, like especially in the higher levels, right? Like if you call somebody out, it has to do with weapons, right? Like they don't want no fighting. If it's that serious, you guys want to see bloodshed. You know what I mean? So I would have a knife and I would have one for him. We just go on myself. You know what I mean? And that was like the reckless behavior that my addiction took me to in prison, right? Because I got 2 strikes already, and getting busted with a knife or even stabbing someone in there, like I can get life in prison, like without a doubt. You know what I mean? But like heroin meant that much to me that I was willing to go to any lengths to get it. You know what I mean? And so I ended up being asked to do something at Ironwood from one of the homies. I remember at Yard, and he was like, "Hey, can you remove this guy for me?" And I was like, "All right, what did he do?" And he said, "He messed up over here." And I said, "All right." So I said, "Who am I going with?" And then they had this little youngster. He was a big youngster, but he had first time being busted, never done a holla before, never put in any work before. So I was like, all right. So he gave me the kite that I had to take inside there, and he gave me some dope for myself and for the back, right? So I remember being on the yard and hooping it. That means putting it up my rectal cavity, and I met the youngster I was gonna do the mission with, right? He was nervous, and I'm like, just kick it, don't trip, you know. And then so we went to look at our victim. This guy's like 6'3", probably like 230 pounds, a pretty big boy, right? And I'm not the biggest dude. I'm like 5'6" on a good day. You know what I mean? But I was stocky, a little healthy, right? The youngster was probably like maybe 5'9", kind of healthy, right? But this guy was pretty big. So he was by the basketball courts, and I remember we were trying to think of a way to approach him without him like being aware, because he knew we had something coming, because he was way at the end of the yard, like his like looking at the rest of the yard by the basketball courts, right behind him is just a wall to the block, right? So he had never seen us before, like he doesn't know that we know him, right? So then we're shooting hoops right there, and I told the dude like I'm gonna bounce the basketball behind him, and I'm gonna grab him, and I'm gonna crack him, and just move on him, right? And so the guy who had the yard said we have two shooters ready in case he has a knife. I was like, why don't you give us a knife then? If you think he has a knife, like you kind of, he was like, nah, don't trip. Like he doesn't have hard candy coming. He just needs to be removed, be brought to the back. So for questioning, and I was like, all right. So I remember going, and I did that. I bounced the basketball behind him. I grabbed him by the shoulder, hit him in the face. He like almost fell, and then the other guy jumped on, and we are just on him. And I remember like he was trying to like get away from us, and then he would look looking at his body to see if he was hit, right? And he seen that there was no blood, so he just kind of submitted, right? So we're beating him up, and then the cops finally seen, and they came, the pepper sprayed us, took us to the hall, and we ended up messing him up pretty bad. Broke his nasal cavity, his eye socket. He had two black eyes. Broke his jaw. You know what I mean? So we got a GBI for that. So I got a 18-month shoot for that. I did it all in the hole in Ironwood, and then I remember getting kicked out to, I think it was B Yard in Ironwood, and pending transfer to Kern Valley, New Delano, right, level 4 180, right. And once I went to committee and I heard that, right, like I felt like a sense of pride, because I'd never been to level 4 before. Like there's stories about level 4 and other respect, and people get killed, and like it's about it right there, right. So I remember going there, and the yard that I was going to was being flipped to S and Y, right? So they were like moving us up, upward, upward, because in the level fours it's 1 through 4, and then 5 through 9, right? So the lower yard is 1 through 4, and then 5 through 9 is the upper yard, and there's a wall in between, right? So they moved all the actives toward the upper yard, and they started filling up the lower with the PCs, right? So we ended up going to A yard, and I remember going to A yard, and like that prison, I probably seen the most stabbings in my life, dude. I want to say I was there for like almost 2 years, and I probably seen at least like maybe 20, 21 stabbings, like legit stabbings too, like people being disfigured in their face, or stabbed in the head, or in the neck, in the stomach, like multiple times by multiple people. You know what I mean? And it's crazy because like it becomes a part of like your everyday life. You know what I mean? Oh, so and so got whacked, or like Stone would tell me, hey, don't kick with that fool, like you don't get it. I was like, all right, and to be trusted with that information, right? And to know, and that's why I think my demeanor is so calm, right? Like people at work, they always think I'm mad, right? But my face is the same whether I'm happy or sad. You know what I mean? Because I think that's a defense mechanism from being in prison, right? Because in prison, if you know something's gonna happen and you get all like excited, right? It's a telltale sign to give away, right? So like if you just are even killed, like whether something's gonna crack or not, you know what I mean? Like that'll benefit you in those situations. You know, so I remember this one time, there was this dude that was gonna get moved on because the person he was working for um, didn't get along with the person who was moving in on the territory, And I remember going to yard, and my thing, I used to like playing basketball, right? Because like you do got my cardio in, and I can be competitive. You know what I mean? And so I would go do that right when yard starts, so I can get a game or two in, and then I'll go do my bar work afterwards, right? And I remember running out to the yard and playing basketball, and they got him like 15 minutes in, and I just remember seeing his nose come undone, right, and like his face was leaking, and his eye was split, and he had a knife too, but there was like five guys on him. You know what I mean? And I remember like seeing him prone down, and his nose was like literally flapped, like you could see like Skeletor. You know what I mean? And and that's not normal. You know what I mean? But like being in that environment, like it breeds evil. You know what I mean? I remember walking into the level 4 or into the shoe program, you can just like feel the evil in there. You know what I mean? And I remember having a dream one night, walking into like a cell block, and meeting people, and like their eyes changed colors, right? Where they turn red, and like there was like reptile skin under them, under their skin. You know what I mean? That you could see for a split second. You know, and it was like a warning to me, right? Like most people are snakes. You know what I mean? Like don't trust them. You know what I mean? So like I said, like I didn't really share too much information, like as needed. You know what I mean? And I uh I communicated when needed, right? But I didn't open up too much. I didn't talk about situations. That's why I think people trusted me, right? And there'll be times where like people would give me like weapons to hold, right? And I never said no, which is probably like my bad too, right? But I wanted to be recognized as someone that was about it. You know what I mean? Someone that wanted to participate, someone that wasn't just there because like Sureños or Southsiders, homies, right? Like we have it good every prison we go to, right? Because of the work of our elders and our predecessors, right? Like the work they put in makes it easier for us. Like we automatically get respect when we go places, right? And I wanted to be able to contribute to that, you know. And I remember going to Kern Valley, and someone asked me, "Hey, we're gonna hit this fool in their room. Can you hold the knife?" Right? And I remember, I think the cops were hitting like the houses that guy talked to, right? Because he was like the Mac rep, right? That means that he's a mouthpiece for the homies, talking with the cops, and the rest he's a mouthpiece to communicate with the cops and the homies, like with the program stuff, right? So I guess he caught wind that he was setting stuff up, and then so I remember this is just like a tale from being in prison, right? I heard if you wrap wet cardboard around a knife and you hoop it, like the wand doesn't catch it, right? So I remember I did that really quick, boom, and I hooped it, and the cops pulled us out. They wanded us, and it didn't go off. And I was like, "Oh shit, this is real," right? And I remember being put back in my cell, right? And then that night, like they ran a regular program, and they hey, man, got it out, gave it to them, they whacked that fool, you know what I mean? And it was like being in there. Totally did something to my mental health, right? But at the same time, like I think it made me be able to deal with adversity as it came, right? Because there's times where there'll be riots going on. So like there was an African American on the left of me, on the right of me, right? We're warring with them, right? So my mindset is I got to get one of them before they get me, right? And like, and to be able to sleep at night, you know what I mean? Like I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, right? So like if I know something's gonna crack, I'll worry about it during the day, but at night I'll put it in the back of my head so I can get my rest. In the morning, it's back out there, right? Because I have to be aware of it. You know what I mean? And a lot of stuff that I went through in there served me today in the field that I work in. You know what I mean? And so I remember going there, and then one of the guys who had the block asked me to move his homeboy, one of his boys, into the block as my celly, right? And I said, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, he's doing stuff. And I said, all right. So we came in, and I remember we were chopping it up, and he was like, "Hey, can you get a phone?" And I said, "I can probably grab one for you." And he said, "What do you got?" And he said, "Tell him I'll send him $50 for 8 hours." And I was like, "All right." So I got him the phone, right? And I remember, like, I was a porter, right? So that means I went and I swept a chair and I passed out chow and passed out laundry, right? So I'm the one that passes stuff in the building, right? And I remember I came back to bring the phone back to the dude, right? He was crying. Don't leave me. And I was like, what the hell? Like this, and he's a big old youngster. He's probably like like 6'3", like 220, you know what I mean? Tatted down, LWAP, life without possibility of parole, double life, you know what I mean? And then, so I was like, what's up? You good? And he was like, yeah, my wife, man, she fucking left me. And I was like, oh shit. But I don't know like the seriousness of that, right? Like that people get left all the time. People get their journal letters all the time. You know what I mean? It's part of doing time. You know what I mean? I know he was young. He was probably like 25, 26 at that time. I was like 33 at the time or 32. And I remember bringing the phone back, right? And then I want to say like a week later, I'm at the basketball court and I'm shooting baskets with a couple of the homies, right? And so there's one basketball court, right? One side is for the homies and the whites. The other side's for the blacks and the others. So the ball goes like past the center court, goes in there. Like you just have to ask him to bring it back. Like we're not supposed to go on their court. You know what I mean? So that's what happened. The ball went over there, and I said, "Hey, take the ball back." So the guy walks the ball to me. He says, "Hey, where's my money at?" Where's your money? I don't know you. And then he was like, I'm on my money. And I was like, you got confused for someone else. He's like, no, your celly owes me money. I was like, well, that's on him. That's not on me. He said, well, I'm going to tell your boy. Meaning he's going to tell the dude who has the yard, right? I said, do what you got to do. That ain't me, though. And he was like, all right. So the homies kind of overheard, right? So they were like, what's up, fool? And I was like, man, my celly owes him money. You know what I mean? I was like, man. So I went back to the cell and I told him, hey, like, you all black? And he was like, yeah. And I said, he's gonna put you on blast, fool. Like, you better take care of that. He was like, man, my wife and this, that. And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, bro, because he's pushing up on that. So I want to say a week later, the yard went down because I guess the blacks moved on the homies on the lower yard because of the same situation. A homie owed a black, the homie didn't pay the black, so the black took off from the yard, right? So then I want to say uh, we're slammed down for like 2 weeks, and they wanted to like do an integration with us and the blacks, right? So they do movements like for medical movements, right? So what I mean by medical movements is they'll like have medical and they'll put us in the race that we're warring with in the same tank, but shackled up, right? But cuff keys are easy to make out of pen fillers or box staples. You know what I mean? So they did that. So they moved on us. So we're gonna move on them, right? So the homies got out the cuffs and whacked like three of them. They got airlifted to the hospital. So like they moved on us, moved on them. So it's on them now to retaliate, right? So they said they wanted peace. So we're like, all right, cool. So I want to say 2 months later, we get word that yard's gonna open, like reopen again, right? And they want anyone who owes blacks to be removed, right? Like only certain people got that information, right? But I was told that. Now my mind, I'm thinking, I said it was black, dude. And then we're locked down. So who else is gonna have to remove them but me, right? So I'm like, man. So like they sent another kite saying like they're gonna send people to medical randomly, so like no one's bombarded with like having to do stuff. That's way it's fair to everyone, right? To pass weapons, to pass dope, to pass kites. You know what I mean? So I'm like, man. So our door opened and they called his last name and he shut the door. He said, I don't sign up for medical. So they reached back out to us like, hey, like why did you guys refuse medical? And he's like, well, I didn't. Well, you got sent the kite already saying that if your name comes up for medical, you got to go. So 3 days later, they call him for medical again, and he leaves the door. And like I knew I was gonna get the call. As soon as he passed the sally port, the door closed. Hey, little man, what's up? Shoot your line. I shot my line, and I got the kite. And it says, "Hey, little man, check this out. We need a big favor from you. We know you got a date, but we really need you to take care of this." And they wanted me to remove my celly from the yard. And I was like, "All right, as long as I'm able to flush whatever I need to flush, then I'll do it." So they shot me the thing, and I put it in my waistband, and went in there, and he came back. He's like, "Everything good?" I'm like, "Everything's good." He was a hungry ass dude, right? So he was always by the chow the cell door when there was passing chow because he wanted to get the biggest plate. So I remember hearing the unlocking of the pod next door. We're in B section and A section. They open up the tray slots, and I remember just turning them around and going to town on them. And the thing bent, so I'm flushing down the toilet, and he starts taking off on me. So we're going at it, and they put a OC spray can in the aerosol grenade can in the cell. Nothing. OC spray gun, a whole bottle, nothing. Another OC grenade, and then another OC can. And I could not literally breathe, right? But I'm just like, this guy has double life. Like, what does he have to lose? And that's what I'm thinking in my mind. So I'm not gonna stop until he does, right? So he said, all right, y'all still, we're done. I said, all right, prone out. So he prones out by the door. I prone out by the desk. They take him out. They take him to the infirmary because he's leaking. They put me in the shower, and we go to the hall, and all that's running through my mind is like, if he tells, like, I'm getting life. You know what I mean? And that's the thing I was worried about. Like, man, and I could have got life in prison like 10, 15 times over, just that one stint alone, not counting like my whole prison career. You know what I mean? But and I'm in these situations because of my drug addiction, right? Because I would have never been in prison if I was never using drugs, right? And like I escalated the situations when I was in there using drugs because it made it easy for them to ask me, right? Like, hey, can you do this? I'll take care of your debt. Don't trip, and I'm saying you something. My motivation was always drugs, right? So I remember being back there and burning, dude, and people shot me their milk to take a bird bath with because it helps like the burning, right? And I remember going to the shower like 3 days later, and I passed by his section. Like, hey, little man. I'm like, what's up? Who's that? He said, this is so and so. I'm like, what's up? What are you doing? I said, I'm good, man. He's like, don't trip, I got you. And like basically he was saying that he wasn't gonna tell. You know what I mean? Like he appreciates for what I did because if he would have got on the yard, he would have like 4 or 5 dudes because he's a big dude on him. You know what I mean? And they probably would have like probably would might not have made it. Just because people like sometimes they'll tell you, right? Like hard candy, just remove them from the yard. Just make sure you get them. They have to go to the back. Or sometimes they mean like take his wind. That means like they don't want to breathe it anymore. But sometimes people go with like because it's hard to like draw back, right? Once your adrenaline's going and someone starts swinging at you, like you're just gonna go until like you know what to do. Like it's either you or him, like fight or flight situation. He said he wasn't gonna tell, right? So I ended up catching a 2 year shoot term after that, and I was single cell after that, right? Because I moved on my celly. So I ended up going to corporate shoot program, and I was there for the hunger strikes for all three of them, right? And I remember the after the first one, they wanted to see how many people they can get to participate. The second one, they wanted to see the bigger numbers, and the third one, that was the one that we're going to the wheels fell off. And I remember after the second one of the homies told me like, "Hey, just precautionary, right? Like put beans and rice in a Ziploc bag or like oatmeal, and then put it in your mattress and sew it up. Just put one bag each, right? That's if you're gonna like literally drop, just eat that just to survive. You know what I mean?" And I was like, all right, because people were like putting bags of stuff in their mattress and sewing it up, and the cops would because the cops took all our store, right? Because they wanted to make sure we're legit like participating in the hunger strike, right? People put too much stuff in their mattress, they'll take it out and give them a new one. So I remember it was like day 19 or 20, right? And I remember like literally going in and out, right? Because like I hadn't ate nothing for 19 days, just drinking coffee and water. And I remember like I couldn't even feel my insides. Like I felt numb, right? So I remember putting like in a milk carton like 3 spoons of beans and rice, and I put water to fill it up, and I let it blow up. And I remember passing out. Must have been like 2 hours, and I got up and I ate like half of it, and I felt sick, but I was able to move a little more, right? And I remember watching 2.5 Men, Charlie Sheen, right, in the shoot program on my TV, and thinking that he was talking to me. Like, you know how he would do like zingers or like one liners, right? And I thought he was talking to me, and I was like, that's a good one, Charlie. You know what I mean? And like, I caught myself. I'm like, God, I'm losing my mind. Like, please don't make me lose my mind. Please don't help me lose my mind. Right? And I kept saying it over and over again, right? And being single cell in the shoot program for a long period of time, because people need human interaction, right? Human touch. You know what I mean? And I was surrounded by people that were no good or people I couldn't talk to, right? So I literally didn't speak a word to somebody. I want to say for like almost 5 months, like just till the cops are brought me my tray or took me out to showers. Thank you, yes, no. You know what I mean? But no interaction, no human touch. You know, besides the cop taking off my handcuffs. You know what I mean? And so I remember going to High Desert, and so I got out of there, went to High Desert, and I remember like 30 days before I was supposed to parole, they said I have a law attorney visit. I'm like, I don't have an attorney. They called me into the program office, and I went in there. I was in a stand-up cage. It was IGI ISU, right? That's like the internal investigation, like the gang unit in prison. They're like, hey, we just want to talk to you about something. I'm like, I got nothing to say. They're like, well, we just want to figure out why you moved on your celly. And I said, I didn't move on my celly. And he was like, well, he says you guys just got in a fight. And I said, if that's what he said, then that's what happened. He said, yeah, but why was he leaking? I said, you have to ask him that. He was like, all right, well, just know that if you don't go home on your day, like, you know why, right? And I was like, man. So like the last 30 days of my sentence, I would just think I'm never going home. I'm never going home. So I remember my sentence date came up, and I ended up my pro date came up, and I remember going in the little van to the train station, then getting on the Amtrak and going home. And like once I got on the train, I knew I was good. So I got out, and I my dad let me stay with him for a few weeks until I was able to get into sober living. And I ended up relapsing the day I got out. And like I said, when I got out, like I was literally whispering, right? And the social anxiety of being surrounded by a lot of people, like would get me really messed up. Like I would have like debilitating anxiety, like where I feel like I was having a panic attack all the time, right? Just because of the like from being in a war zone. It's like I've never been to war like in Afghanistan or anything, right? But it's like that's the closest thing I could picture to, right? Because you're literally like trying to survive in there, coming out to society where people are just going and moving so fast, you know what I mean? And like having people behind me, my peripheral is still like on point. When I see stuff moving by the side of my eyes, like I'm really cautionary, right? And that's why I don't wear sunglasses or glasses, right? Because like I have to be able to have my peripheral vision, you know. So I remember getting out, using, feeling bad, and I was able to test clean for my PO. My PO was recommending me to go to residential. I'm like, why? He was like, I tested clean for you, and he was like, you need a behavior modification because of all my the stuff that I have in prison, my C file. There was a lot of violence in there, right? But like when in Rome, you know what I mean? Like in prison, you're expected to do violence, like it's part of it. You know what I mean? And I just remember, I was bucking that. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna go. So he 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 would come to my dad's house, right? And like literally search all my stuff, have him on the couch, you know what I mean? For like 3 or 4 days in a row, right? And I remember coming home on a Friday night, my curfew's 10 o'clock, and I got there 9:30. Everyone's on the couch, and I walked in, like, what are you doing? He was like, go to residential, and I'll make the stop. And so the next day I called him and I said, all right, I'll do residential. But I wasn't like I did it for him. Like I wasn't doing it because I wanted to get clean, right, or stay clean. And I thought I could still drink, right, because drugs are my problem. You know what I mean? So I just remember going to Phoenix House, and after 30 days, after I was able to work, I gave him a bunk schedule, right, saying that I work weekends. It was a graveyard job, but it was like 3 days a week, right? So I would go to my neighborhood or to my dad's house and drink because my dad didn't think I had a drinking problem either, right? We didn't know the severity of addiction, right? So I would drink, and I remember like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning before I had to go back with 2 gallons of water, drinking them, and running on the treadmill for like 3 hours before I went back, just so I could like pass a breathalyzer test, or if I got UA'd, that it would be negative. You know what I mean? And that's crazy that someone would go through so much hurdles just to drink. You know what I mean? Mm. And so I ended up graduating the Phoenix House. I met a girl at the Phoenix House. I went to Clean Path Sober Living to get 4 months free sober living, and she ended up getting kicked out for using. I was already out, like working for like 2 months, saved up like 3 or 4 grand, got a little Honda Accord, and she got kicked out. So me being the fixer, the saver that I am, I got a weekend pass, and I got a hotel room for us, right? So we got the hotel room. I got some drinks for us, and like after our third drink, I'm like, fuck this. I wanna get high because like it wasn't enough for me. She did heroin also, right? So I went to my neighborhood, picked up, we got loaded. Um, and I couldn't go back to the sober living. So I told the sober living that I was going to help my dad out because my dad's health wasn't that good. I told my dad I graduated early. So I went back to my dad's, and I ended up uh, probably there for like a week. I wasted all that money. And then so I told him that I'm hitting the streets. He was like, why? And I said, I've been using. So like that kind of broke his heart. So I remember like being out there, like that girl was like my best crime partner. Like she would go boost stuff, and I'll return it. We'll get a gift card, and I'll go trade the gift card into a kiosk and get like 70% of the money. So we did that for about 4 months. She got incarcerated. I was out running around still. And then she got out, she went to a program, right? And I was supposed to go to a program also. And then they didn't have a bed. So she went on a program on Thursday, and on Friday, on Thursday night I picked up my connection didn't have the full gram that I wanted. She said, I have half a gram. I'll give you half a gram. Give me the money for the full gram, and tomorrow I'll give you the rest of the full gram. And I said, all right. So I remember they didn't have a bid until Monday, so I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna just keep using it until I get into the program. So I remember being in my neighborhood because there's like a little wash, right, where I felt safe to park, and I used to sleep there all the time in my car. And I get up in the morning and I'm trying to fix up my shot, and my rig, my needle gets clogged. So I'm trying to unclog it. Cop comes up with a gun and he said, "Don't freeze, or I'm gonna shoot you." Right? So I drank the heroin and I threw the needle on the ground and I said, "I'm getting busted again." Right? But I didn't know about this new Prop 47, right? That cite and release. So they said possession, all right, got me in the car. I told them where more needles are at. I was cooperative with them, you know what I mean? So we'd take my car. So they, I'm back of the car and I said, man, I heard go to prison again. I said, no, we're going to decide to release you. I said, what the hell? So I go to the station and my PO put a power warrant out for my arrest, right? So he said, you didn't tell us you're on AB 109. I said, you didn't ask me. And then so they're like, well, your PO wants to give you a 10-day flash. And I'm like, all right, I could do a 10-day flash. I need it anyways. So I remember like going to the county jail. And as soon as we went to the corridors in there to go to the county jail, all those times that I went to the programs, um, all the times that I went to those programs because I was homeless, like we had to go to meetings as part of the treatment, right? But I only went for the girls or get out and smoke, get out of the house, right? But seeds were planted, right? And I remember the two phrases that I heard in my head over and over, like just ringing, was nothing changes and nothing changes and contrary action, right? Like I've heard it probably like 50 million times at the meetings, right? But I didn't know the actual meaning, right? But it was like, it was answered in my head, right? Like keep doing this, you're gonna keep coming here for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? And then it was like, do something different. Try working a program. Try not hanging around your neighborhood. Try like putting yourself in better situations, right? So I remember going up to my tank and my celly was making wine and like I'm a regular, right? So people know me in there. They were like, "Hey, you want to do some heroin? Nah, I want to do some speed." Nah, like, what are you, Christian? I said, "No, I just want to get high." I started feeling disrespected because they were asking me, and I remember just being on my bunk, right, in my cell, and just be like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but like I can't do what I've been doing. Just help me. You know, like I want to stay clean. And the reason why I got clean is I was tired of being incarcerated. That's the whole reason why I got clean, right? Because in those 8 years that I did, I lost all my grandparents. I lost an aunt and an uncle that were really close and me growing up that let me stay with them and took care of me when I was younger, right? And two of my friends, two close friends passed away, right? And I wasn't able to grieve their deaths. I wasn't able to cry about it. You know what I mean? I wasn't able to be a part of their services, you know, and just being away from my loved ones, right? My nieces, my nephews, they grew up without their uncle. I didn't see my mom for 20 years. You know what I mean? And she moved to Vegas. And so I got out from there and I went to healthcare. I ended up getting 45 days, 90 days will have. I'm going to healthcare and signing up for 3 programs, Cooper Fellowship, Will Glen, and Phoenix House. And then I remember my dad picked me up, and my dad was just so tired. He was like, I want to hear it. Just fucking do it. You know what I mean? And I remember going to Norms with him, and then Cooper Fellowship calls him. I didn't have a phone. I gave him his number. I said, Gabriel comes here in an hour. He has a bed. And I remember we stopped by his house to get my belongings, right? And I remember uh, he brought my belongings in a trash bag. It was a trash bag halfway full of clothes with one shower shoe, one chancla, and a toothbrush without a cover on it. Just dirty ass clothes. And he gave it to me. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm 36 years old and this is all I have to my name. Like I have friends that have families, they have wives, they have businesses, they have houses, they have cars. This is all I have to my name. I remember going to Cooper Fellowship and just being like, dude, like I was so defeated. Like I was willing to do whatever anyone suggested as long as I could stay clean. Yeah. So I get there and I do my intake, and I remember uh, my counselor was on me, right? He was like, you need to get a sponsor. And at Cooper Fellowship, like the outside meetings used to be able to, people from the outside used to be able to come to our meetings, right? I remember like there was a smoke area, right? And I'm right there. I was about 7 days in. I'm smoking a cigarette. My counselor comes, hey, you need a sponsor. I'm like, all right. He goes, you need a sponsor like ASAP. I was like, all right, get off me. I just got here. And there was a white dude, right, that was tatted up with the big old whip, right? And he goes, that's your sponsor right there. I was like, I don't know that fool. He was like, you need a sponsor? I said, yeah, I got his number. And then so we connected, and he got me through my 12 steps in my 90 days I was there. So after doing my 12 steps in 90 days, I seen the importance of my recovery, right? and I was taught that it goes my higher power, my recovery, and everything else comes third, fourth, and fifth, right? Because it's a spiritual program, right? And without my higher power, I don't have recovery. Without my recovery, I don't have nothing, right? So my recovery is at the utmost, and I have friends and family today that they still ask me, why do you go to meetings still? Like, why can't you have a beer? You know what I mean? And I might be have a drink, you know what I mean? But I really don't want to take that chance, because I like being in on my senses, and I like to remember like what I did the night before, and I like my life today. And so after going through Cooper Fellowship, I had 2 months free funding still at Clean Path. So I went back to Clean Path, and and I remember I was working odd jobs through agencies, right? And I was supposed to get hired on from a temp to permanent job. And like I used to sweep a mop like during my break time when I'm not supposed to like show that I was a hard worker. But the people who were hired on already, they got mad, right? Because I was making them look lazy. You know what I mean? So I think someone hated on me, right? So on Friday I was supposed to go to work. The person from the agency called me and said they terminated your contract, but they were supposed to hire me on that Monday, right? And I was like, what? And that broke my heart. I'm like, dude, like I can't win. Like, and I was getting really deflated, right? Well, that night there was a guy that was with me the first time I was at Clean Path, so tatted from the face, homie from LA, from South Central, right? I'm like, what are you doing here, fool? He's like, I work here. I'm like, what? Because Clean Path has the way 8109 stop program portion, but they had a private pay uh, commercial insurance program also, PPO insurance, private pay portion also, right? He says, yeah, I work for the private pay side. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, I'm a house manager and I don't have to pay rent and I get paid like 16, 17 bucks an hour. I said, no way, I need a job like that. So he said, ask my house manager was a director of operations, right? So he's all ask him. So I asked him, hey man, can I get a house managing job at the other side? He was like, man, you need like a year clean for that. And I'm like, oh man. So he was like, you know what, apply for support staff when you get out of here. And I was like, what the hell is support staff? And he's like, just apply, you'll be good. And I was like, all right. So I remember getting out of there and going and applying, getting called 2 days for the interview. 2 days later, I'm working for them. I remember I was working as an ILP driver for a few months, and then a graveyard position at the residential house opened up, and I started working there for about 4 or 5 months. Then swing shift opened up, and I just worked my way up, right? Like and I couldn't believe I was getting paid to help people get their life back on track, right? Like, and I'm really like into like learning, right? Especially something that I'm interested in, right? So I would ask questions about compliance and why do we do this and how come we don't do this, and I started like figuring out the puzzle in my head, right? So I moved up in the company, and then so that company shut down, so I moved to another company, right? And all the stuff that I went through in prison like kind of helped me out in my career today, right? And so I all this experience working in treatment, I'm now a program director at a medical detox. You know what I
Nice.
mean? And I've worked in the industry 10.5 years. I just picked up my 11 years clean.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And still doing it myself, right? Like when I make the choices, I end up in handcuffs or homeless or in prison, right? But it's all to my higher power in the program, and so I ended up so when I first got clean, I made 5 year plans, right? My first 5 year plan was to get a stable job, to get a newer car, and to get a place to live. I obtained that, right? My second 5 year plan was to uh, be a manager, like a director or something, right? And to eventually open up my own business, right? And the business model that I had was a nonprofit medical detox, right? Because working in private pay, commercial insurance sector, and then like going through medical nonprofit places, there's a big disparity in treatment, right? Like, and it's sad to say, like the people that are in private insurance treatment, right, they don't take advantage of the stuff that they have, right? And I believe that of people that came from marginalized, unrepresented communities would have that same access, that they would be able to recover and recover better. You know what I mean? Because like the nonprofit medical places, not to talk crap. I mean, like if you need a place to kick, like you need a place to kick, right? But like they don't do like the one-on-one therapy. They don't create treatment plans to set you up for success. They don't deal with the traumas on why you might be using, right? In the private sector, they do that. You know what I mean? And so like I went with the So I started thinking like, man, like I want to be able to help out my people. You know what I mean? The people that struggled with like or came from the bottom where I came from. You know what I mean? People getting out of prison, people who are homeless, people on the streets. You know what I mean? I want to give them my actual shot, right? And then so like after thinking about it, I'm like, but you know what? Like I don't know how to do that. I don't know the business aspect of running a treatment center. I don't know like the clinical behind it, right? I know the operations and the structure and the protocols to run a treatment center, but I don't know like the other aspect of it, right? So I decided to go back to school, right? And I remember I was like 2 months in my first semester, my mom passed away, so I dropped out, right? Went to deal with her stuff, and then I remember Anne Marie from Rising Scholars. She was a part of my mom's service down here in California, and she really supported me with the Rising Scholars family. They came to my mom's service and went to the reception afterwards, right? And that meant a lot to me. You know that people at my school actually cared about me that much to come show support. And then I want to see like 2 months later, I get a phone call from her again, like, "Hey, let's finish what you started." Right? And I was like, dude, like I'm not really meant for school. I hated school. Like I was just doing it, and I don't think I can do it. Right? She was like, at least give it a semester, and if you can't, we'll work on something to get you accommodations. Right? So I remember I took business 100, human services 200, and human services 241 or 224. I forgot what it was, but I got all A's. You know what I mean? And I was like, I've never got all A's in my life, right? So and then to navigate like the financial aid aspect, the DSS aspect, the services that could help. Like I didn't know how to like create a Word document to be able to send it to my professor, and like how to like format the email, right? I didn't even know what the hell the syllabus was to check it, or you know what I mean. And so like my friend right here, Joseph Valadez, right? He's a big inspiration in my life, man. And my home group in San Antonio Club, like he welcomed me with open arms, and he got his master's right through Long Beach. And I remember when I was struggling, I reached out to him like, "Hey man, like think about hanging it up." And he's like, "Why, bro?" And I told him what he was looking at. Ask Anne Marie for this and ask Anne Marie for that. And I asked her, and she plugged me in. Now I'm showing people how to sign up for classes, or how to navigate financial aid, or how to like create a Word document or stuff that makes stuff easier for them. You know what I mean? Like I've probably gotten like 15 or people, 20 people registered in Rising Scholars or at Cypress College now. You know what I mean? And so, like at the end of this semester, God willing, I'll have my associate's degree from Cyprus.
Wow,
You know
that's
what I mean?
amazing.
And yeah, it's going to be on to Cal State Fullerton for my bachelor's. You know, and if you would ask me 11 years ago if I would be where I'm at today with my career wise or education wise, I would have been you're crazy, right? But God has a plan. You know what I mean? And His plan is to help people that were struggling with the same stuff I was struggling, right? Because I should be doing life 10 times over or dead 10 times over, you know. But He had me go through what I needed to go through, and I know He gave me choices throughout, and I chose wrong most of the times. You know what I mean? But He never counted me out. You know what I mean? And He was like, "I'm gonna let you go through this, right? But you're gonna get an experience, and your situation is gonna be able to help somebody else later on." Right. And I
Nice.
created a podcast called Fools Get Clean Too that showcase people's recovery journeys, their comeback stories.
What does being a Mexican American mean to you today?
Being a Mexican American to me today means that, especially in the United States, right? Um, we're never going to be American enough for the Americans or Mexican enough for the Mexicans. But like, I'm proud of my culture, right? I'm proud of my roots, my heritage. Um, my mother's from Mexico, from Ciudad Juarez. My dad's from Watts, from LA. And it means that our people's been oppressed for a lot of years, and they went through a lot of hardships, you know, and I went through a lot of oppression and hardships, and I've been marginalized before, you know, and so it means to persevere, to overcome, and to have pride. You know what I mean? Have pride in where you come from. Don't be ashamed. Like we may not look like other people, but we're fully capable of being successful people. You know, and especially like the rising scholars, the underground scholars, the project kinships of the world, right? they show that, you know what I mean, that just because that you had adversity in your life and you might not have had the best upbringing, or you got incarcerated or had a drug problem, you know what I mean, that we can still have productive lives today.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing your life story with me today. It was amazing to hear your struggles, your experience, and where you are today.
Thank you for interviewing me.
Thank you.